Hello and a very warm welcome to you all. It's great to have you with us today. I'm Eva, the manager of the customer engagement team here at Oak Engage, and I'll be your host for this session on the right to disconnect. So, who are Oak Engage? Well, we're an intranet software provider, and our platform empowers you to reach and engage your deskless and desk-based workforce, streamlining things like your onboarding and delivering targeted communications. It's the essential go-to for employees, whether they are looking to keep up to date with the latest company news or to find important documents and resources. Everything they need is in one place. And the right to disconnect has been a topic that we've been discussing internally and debating whether this is a software problem or whether it's a cultural issue within organizations. So before we jump in, just a few housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded and will be distributed after the session, so please be mindful when sharing information that you don't share anything confidential. We'd also love to hear from you, so please feel free to use the chat functionality to get in touch. I can see some people are already saying hello and welcome to you all. And also we'd like to encourage you to share your thoughts and questions as we're chatting through. Plus, we'll be launching a few polls, so we look forward to hearing your feedback. So what exactly is the right to disconnect and what are we hoping to achieve through today's webinar and also Oak's broader campaign? Well, the right to disconnect is really the ability to truly switch off from work outside of working hours. And our goal is to raise awareness around the always on work culture that spans multiple industries. Plus, we're looking to highlight the unique pressures that it places on HR and internal comms professionals. Now, it's been legislated in some European countries, including Ireland, Portugal, Belgium, Italy, Spain, and France, I believe. But here in the UK, the Labour government have, whilst they included it on their manifesto, have since taken it off that political agenda. So now it's in the UK down to organisations to create policies and guidelines for employees around that right to disconnect. I am thrilled to be joined today by Joanna, the CEO of The Curious Route, an internal communications consultancy based in Dublin. Joanna is a fellow of the Institute of Internal Communication and a multi-award winning communications expert. So I don't know about yourselves, but I'm really looking forward to hearing her insights on this important topic. Also joining us is Ryan, People Science Director at WorkBuzz. With over a decade of experience, Ryan has helped hundreds of businesses build cultures that are positive, psychologically safe, and high-performing. His work focuses on amplifying employee voice, and I'm excited to hear his perspective on how that connects with the right to disconnect. Now, in April this year, we surveyed over 1,000 employees across the UK in a variety of different industries to answer some of the key questions around burnout and switching off outside of work hours. And it revealed some shocking statistics. 86% said they would be more likely to apply for a job at a company that openly promotes a right to disconnect policy. There's a clear opportunity here for employers to not only write, but to implement a right to disconnect policy within their organisation. And this should not be considered a box-ticking exercise. Based upon these statistics, there is clearly a need for cultural change within organisations. A whopping 69% agree that they would be more productive at work if they knew their time outside of work was protected. This indicates that there is a real desire for clear boundaries and work-life balance is important. And we should also remind ourselves that we work to live, not live to work. Further to our broader survey, we also focused and surveyed 250 HR and internal comms professionals from around the UK to shine a light on burnout in these roles specifically. We wanted our research to focus on the detrimental impact of burnout and on the mental and physical well-being of not just employees in general, but those in HR and internal comms roles. The statistics are quite alarming, highlighting a clear need for healthier work environments. But where there's a problem, there is also an opportunity. And with the right communication, tools and leadership, we can make steps towards some real change. Now, there's plenty more statistics in our full report, which we'll send you afterwards. But just to give you a feel of the current situation of why this topic is so important, We've got 76% of people saying they've experienced burnout at work. That is a whopping 6% increase on our wider survey. We've also then got 61% saying that overwhelming workload is the biggest contributor to their burnout. Now, that is a huge increase of 15% from our wider survey results. The message here is clear. Human resources and internal comms professionals are expected to be available at all times and have an overwhelming workload. We've got 62% saying that they are worried that saying no will impact how they're perceived. Now, at this point, I'd like to invite Joanna into the conversation to share her insight into the kind of pressure that internal comms and HR teams are under right now.
Hello, this is my favorite topic of all time, because if you follow me on LinkedIn at all, you'll know that I talk a lot about the pressures and the difficulty of working in internal communication. Now, that's not to be just complaining about the field, because I love working in this field and it's very rewarding and I love it. But it's also very difficult because of the pressures on us to deliver so much. And like one of the common things I see all the time that results in burnout like this is people operating as teams of one. Sometimes even in organizations that are massive, like thousands and thousands of employees, and one person is magically expected to be the internal comms director, manager, and specialist all in one. And when you couple that with the fact that the types of people, in my experience, that work in internal comms are very helpful, very altruistic, really collaborative, maybe tending into the people pleasing bit, like we really want to help people, it's a recipe for disaster and does result in like quite alarming statistics like this.
Very, very true. And Ryan, what do you see in terms of how burnout is impacting like things like motivation and productivity from kind of like an organizational perspective?
Yeah. Hi everyone. I mean, this is a really important topic, simply because what we're seeing from kind of research with organizations across all sectors, all geographies, is that well-being continues to decline. We are seeing levels of well-being suffering, particularly within certain roles. So we've focused in specifically on HR and internal comms with part of this research, as you mentioned, Eva, but more generally, those who are in manager roles, senior managers, middle managers, really feeling high levels of burnout, really struggling with their well-being. And if we think about what we're like, not necessarily even from a burnout perspective, but just when we're feeling under high levels of strain, which can lead to burnout when it's for extended periods of time, we know that it has an impact on our emotional regulation, behavioral regulation, as well as cognitive functioning. So naturally, it's going to impact things like our concentration, our decision making, our productivity in the workplace. It's also going to impact how we interact with others, both inside and outside of the workplace. So burnout is something which can have a really severe impact on not just productivity, but all aspects of our life. And there's some really quite shocking statistics about burnout leading to up to 50% decrease in productivity. But then some of the stats, which from my perspective are even more alarming, is it's to a cost of over £100 billion in the UK each year and over 300 billion in the US. So this is something that we need to really be looking at the root cause of burnout, because some of what we'll talk about today is how you respond and react to burnout where it exists. But what we really need to focus on as practitioners is how do we culturally prevent this from happening in the first place inside of our organizations.
So I couldn't agree more, to be honest. I think it is it's such a big issue, and I feel like we can explore this topic a bit deeper. So why are people so burnt out, and what can we do about it? So we're going to go to our expert panel discussion now for some more top tips on setting boundaries, managing workload, and maintaining effective communication. Now, we've already touched upon how, there's that worry about saying no, and our survey results show that 73% were agreeing that they were expected to be always on, which long term is going to have a real detrimental impact on well-being. So I'm now going to come to you, Joanna, for a bit of discussion around how you feel that internal comms and HR professionals can set these realistic boundaries so that they can help others more effectively.
Yeah, I think I talk to internal communicators all day, all week. It's all I do. And one thing I see come up again and again and again for people who feel I'm really busy, I'm really overworked, I'm really tired, and I'm also not really getting any recognition for the amazing amount of work I am doing, and I'm struggling to demonstrate the value of my work. I will ask them about what is the purpose of internal communication in your organization? What are you there to deliver? And what is the scope of your role? Where do you play? Where are the guardrails for your role? And often those two answers are very difficult for them, or those two questions are very difficult for them to answer because they don't have a clear purpose for the function, and they haven't managed to contract well with their boss yet about what they should and shouldn't be doing, what's on their to-do list and what's on their to-don't list, which is my favorite exercise of all time. The other bit that you really need, and that lots of internal communicators are operating without, is a very clear strategy. And that gives you your guardrails to say, this is what's a priority for us. This is what I'm on the hook to deliver. This is my focus. And yes, I might be bombarded by loads of other stuff, but that gives me the permission and the scope to say no to all that other stuff if it's not aligned. So those two meaty things, like the purpose and the scope and then the strategy, that feels like a lot of hard work up front, and it is, but that all helps in the long run with mitigating the risk of burnout, because you have a clear focus of what you're expected to do. You understand how that's helping the business, and it gives you that permission to say no to all the other random acts of communication that we are asked to do.
That's really interesting. I mean, I guess you must speak to lots of different people in terms of helping different individuals kind of managing their workload and ensuring that they're kind of maintaining those realistic boundaries and not being expected to step outside of what's kind of the normal working hours. Now, Ryan, what are your thoughts on realistic boundaries? Should this be down to the individual, or do you think there's more, where does the responsibility lie?
Mhm. Well, it's a great question. I mean, I just saw in the chat there as well, with a huge proportion of the people that are with us today saying that they have experienced burnout at work. And in the one sense, it's a shocking statistic, but on the other sense, it tells you that there's really something going on here beyond us just not being very responsible as individuals and capable of managing our workload. And that's why burnout, it can't be considered. We can't just think about this as a policy. It's about culture, and this is a culture thing. It's a behavioral thing. So as individuals, there are absolutely things that we can do to better role model well-being behaviors, to try and support our own well-being. I think, building on what Joanna said, one thing is around thinking about energy. So Joanne talks a lot, rightly so, about really getting those guardrails and clarity on what your role is and what you need to deliver. What I don't think we do enough as individuals in organizations is spend enough time thinking about what really energizes us in our role. Because when you're spending too much of your time doing things which you don't enjoy, that's naturally going to lead you to potentially suffering from burnout. So that would be something as well. Really thinking about what are the aspects of your role that you most enjoy, and how can you almost shape more of your role to be doing more of that, as well as understanding what energizes other people. So there's a big design piece that can be done individually, within teams, within organizations. But fundamentally on that side, you do need managers and leaders who really get this and really want to champion it and drive it forward. Everyone on this call could be absolutely fantastic at prioritizing our well-being. But if we're working within a culture and a climate that doesn't really care about well-being or doesn't focus enough attention to it, we will still feel those pressures. We will still experience things which can lead to burnout, like poor communication and a lack of clarity about the future, or unrealistic, unreasonable job demands being placed on us. So this needs to be something which aligns from leaders right through to managers to individuals to truly prevent burnout across our organizations.
I love that. If you don't mind if I jump in, I was just I think her name is Emma Greed. She's some like millionaire business lady. She was on that Diary of a CEO podcast recently. And she, you know, the way they always have these clickbaity titles. But anyway, the one they had for her was she went on this rant about how your work life balance as an employee of mine is nothing to do with me. That is completely your responsibility. Don't talk to me about it. I don't want to hear it. That's up to you how you manage your time and how you manage your life. And I just thought, how out of touch can you
Absolutely.
be? Because Ryan's totally right. There are huge structural and cultural factors at play here. You can have the best will in the world, the best strategy in the world, the best boundaries in the world. But if your boss expects you to be on all the time and deliver all the work, and if you don't, you're fired, what can you do about that? So I think, like, I love what Ryan is saying there because it's not just about us. This is a bigger systemic problem.
Yeah, it's really
100%.
interesting as well, Ryan, when you mentioned about playing to people's strengths is kind of what I heard in amongst that. And just if you're doing a role where you're having to do something that you're really not that happy doing, I guess you almost have that sense that you're wading through a treacle to get through your working day. So you're probably like more likely to feel burnt out. So I think there's a real responsibility in terms of as those of us out there that are maybe managing individuals as well to make sure that we are playing to the strengths of our team and encouraging growth and development with people to help them, be successful and happy in the role that they're doing.
That's exactly it. Skills are important, and we've spent decades now recruiting based on skills and skills match to job description and things like that. But what we need to do to enhance that is start thinking more about what energizes people and actually how is the role going to fit with that, so that we're actually thinking more about well-being. There is another side to this as well, which is actually a bit of a watch out. So we talked about, I think you mentioned, Eva, that burnout can obviously have an impact on engagement, productivity, retention, all these things, which is absolutely right. The research does back that. One of the things that I've seen quite a lot over the last few years is actually instances where high levels of engagement can actually lead to burnout itself. So naturally, we all want people in our organizations to be engaged. The challenge that you've got is where you've got really highly engaged individuals working particularly when they work in organizations with a high sense of purpose. So an easy one in the UK is for us to think about our National Health Service workers, particularly during times of COVID, where their sense of purpose is so high and their motivation and their commitment, their engagement to the role is so high, they can prioritize the needs of the business over their own needs too much, and it can actually lead to declining levels of well-being. And we've seen that time and time again, not just in healthcare, but within many different industries. So sometimes that's why it's really important to have different data points where you might have higher levels of engagement, but if you also see lower levels of well-being, which we see quite consistently across different industries at the moment, there can be something there as well, that you can have people who are at that risk of burnout in the future, albeit they might not necessarily be there now.
I'm really happy that you brought that up because I learned a phrase sometime last year that I'd never heard before, but like I felt nearly personally attacked when I heard this phrase because I was like, that's me all over. And the phrase is passion fatigue. The people that work in internal comms are so passionate about their job and passionate about helping people and delivering great work. Finding that work that you love and that you find really energizing, gives you purpose, can be detrimental if you don't balance it very well. I definitely had this. I used to work as head of internal comms in the Irish police force. I did that job during COVID, and I got completely caught up in the mission of keeping people safe. That was the mission of the Irish police. And that became my identity throughout COVID. And I crashed and burned really bad because all I was doing was I was constantly thinking about work. I had like the weight of the Irish police on my shoulders. I put that weight there. Like if a police officer contracted COVID, I felt like that was my fault because my communication must not have been clear enough, or maybe I didn't do my job well, which in hindsight is bonkers. But it was this passion fatigue. It was that I cared too much and I did too much. I gave too much of myself. And I really feel like in our community, in the comms community, we just need to watch out for that and to be aware of it in ourselves.
Exactly that, because essentially for the people in comms and HR roles, we're all really passionate about culture within our organization. So when we're tirelessly trying to get leaders and managers to think in a different way around culture, when we're trying to get the business really thinking about culture on a day-to-day basis, not just once a year when they maybe do a survey, it can be really tiring for us. It can be hard for us to take when we're seeing some of these things not happening, or when we feel as practitioners that our voice at that leadership table is not maybe taken as seriously as some other functions in the organization, when fundamentally what we're trying to do is put people and culture at the heart of our businesses. So all of these things can absolutely have an impact on us and lead to some of those stats that Eva shared at the beginning around the higher levels of burnout within our profession. So thanks for sharing that, Joanna, as well. That's really powerful.
Yeah, there's some interesting comments coming in as well with people. The fatigue comment that you made, that's just disappeared off screen. I've forgotten exactly what it is that you said before. What was it? Passion fatigue. It's really resonating with some of our attendees today, which is really interesting. And people also just, talking about being emotionally drained from having to create a culture program completely from scratch. I can imagine that's a big undertaking, and then taking that responsibility so seriously, it's just leaving you with nothing left to kind of give to the rest of your working life. And even it has an impact when you take it home as well, doesn't it? Because you end up so burnt out that you've got nothing left to give, and you're just in this constant kind of eat, sleep, repeat work. That's all that you're doing, sort of, and you end up being.
And it's a tricky one, because you don't want to care less. That would be impossible for me to do a job where I just didn't care, and I would never do a job where I did it half-assed. That's just not me. That's not the way we work in comms. So that's for me why the whole bit about purpose and scope and strategy is so fundamental, because it gives you a place to put all that passion without getting you dragged into a million things, without having you work until midnight. So you just need a bit of clarity and focus, and a place to hone all that energy into.
Yeah, 100%. Now, one of the other key findings from our survey was that across the HR and internal comms profession, they're seeing an increased workload without getting any extra resource. So there's kind of this expectation that they can do twice as much in the same amount of time, and that's going to be absolutely fine. So, Joanna, I was going to come to you here and just ask, what happens when HR and IC teams are too under-resourced to switch off? And if you wouldn't mind sharing some strategies and tools which you have found effective for tackling workload and prioritizing mental health in such a high-pressured role.
Yeah, it is a lot. I actually just had a coaching call with someone a couple of hours ago who, she's a client I've been working with for a while, but she said, I've been doing really well with boundaries, and I have a young daughter, and I've been doing really well at finishing at 5, because she had been in a previous role where she was totally burnt out, and she swore it would never happen again. She said, but I can see it creeping back now. Our organization is going through some restructures, there's extra work, I'm expected to do it on top of my role. Last night I worked till 9, then I'm going to work over the weekend. And sometimes it is structural, but sometimes for me, I think it helps to get into your own head and think, am I causing any of this problem for myself? Sometimes I have definitely had perfectionist tendencies over the years. I would say I'm a recovering perfectionist. Sometimes things don't need to be perfect. Some things can just get done, and it might be not to the standard that you want, but it's done and it's fine. Sometimes things can be delegated to other people. They won't do it as well as you, and that is also fine. And sometimes when your job shifts, there's some organizational change or there's a crisis and your job has to shift into that mode, then maybe some of the business as usual stuff can be dropped. So we talked through how can you have a conversation with your boss to recontract your role, because it sounds like your role has changed. The organization has changed. Your role has changed. You can't do two. So some of it is reflecting internally and saying, am I causing any of this problem to myself? I definitely hold on to some projects that maybe I don't need to. Maybe other people could do them. And so something you can be doing to enable that is if there's repeatable work that you're doing, help your stakeholders to do it themselves. Make templates of things. I'm such a big fan of templates. If you're spending loads of time creating comms plans for people, Make a comms plan template and a simple video walkthrough. Show stakeholders how to do it themselves for like a simple, low risk, non-important work. You don't need to be involved in everything. So like templates are going to be your best friend.
It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I know internally we have some templates for just, like you say, those repetitive tasks so that we can then, speed up that process of getting things through. I think we've got some things coming into the chat here, which is super interesting about, we've got, I don't know what your thoughts are on this about where it's been frowned upon to have boundaries in high performing teams. There's somebody's experience here, and encouraging wellness and creating a healthy balance is not something that can be done in smaller teams if the overarching team leadership express the opposite sentiments, which is really interesting. In terms of, I'm intrigued to know why it's like frowned upon to have boundaries in high performing teams. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that, either Ryan or Joanna, or anything that you wanted to add on there.
Well, I think the sentence or the last few words is kind of what we were talking about earlier with the three, pockets of responsibility. Everyone has to take responsibility for well-being and burnout at work, from leaders right down to individuals. And if leaders don't value well-being, if they don't really connect and understand that actually a high-performing team needs to be sustainable. A high-performing team is one that can maintain levels of performance for a sustained period of time. If you're burning people out, you can't do that. So I would be challenging kind of what we actually mean by high performance inside organizations. But really, this is a storytelling piece with organizations. But if you present to a senior leadership team and say, well, we've got low levels of well-being across the organization at the moment, particularly in some of our younger colleagues, which is a common trend, you will get leaders that respond with things like, oh, they need to be more resilient, or they've got no idea how difficult the role the role was back when I was doing it, so on and so forth. But it's how you bring that data to life for leaders and help them really understand just what impact well-being's having, or how you use other things that you're doing internally to help them get a better appreciation of other people's perspectives and experiences at work. But yes, leaders continue to present the biggest challenge to us as organizations, and perceptions of leadership globally have been on the steady decline over the last 10 years, and they've declined at an even sharper rate over the years since we came out of COVID. So when we're talking about the burnout challenge and we're talking about how we solve this culturally, they are going to be the most critical layer within the organization for us to work on and try and shift and challenge their mindsets. That's a reality, and there's no way of getting around it. You can't shortcut past it, because leaders fundamentally have such a huge influence on the culture within their business.
Yeah, Eric's commented there saying that often working yourself to ground is being recognized and rewarded instead of discouraged. That is exactly what you're talking about there. It's that shift in the leadership's mentality, is to say, do you know what, that job will still be there tomorrow. You don't have to do it right now today.
Exactly. It's exactly that. It's the way we're burning people out through the way in which we structure work, the way we structure our organizations, the behaviors that we reward, the behaviors that we actually ignore and therefore aren't reinforcing. There's so much there, but ultimately, even as organizations, we have to, if you look at something like office working, if you look at the research, and there's a wealth of research out there that shows that there's an actual optimal hybrid way of working that to have the right positive impact on well-being levels, and that is 2 to 3 days in the office. So there's a lot of research that shows that fully remote work comes with dangers around feeling loneliness, feeling isolation, feeling a sense of disconnect. And therefore, if you do have a fully remote workforce, you really need to prioritize on how you can manage and mitigate against the potential risks of that. But there's also a lot of research that shows that we're in a world now where having people come into the office 4+ days a week also has a significantly negative impact on well-being. And then, of course, if you start to drill down to different populations within your workforce, like working parents, for example, it can have an even greater negative impact and a greater risk of burnout. Yet what are the majority of organizations still doing? Largely driven by leadership, not necessarily HR directors. We're seeing more of them call for people to come back into the office for 4 or 5 days a week, because that's their personal preference. That's how they view the world of work, not being more objective and having a look at what's actually the best and most optimal way of working for the well-being, the engagement, the performance of people in their business. So I think our role as HR and comms practitioners is to keep fighting that fight. You know, we've always been trying to challenge leadership teams with insights on culture and to trying to get them thinking differently about colleague experience. But we need to get better at how we use data and how we tell stories to challenge some of those ingrained mindsets, some of those ways of working that we see within leaders and management teams as well.
I really like that you brought that up. I used to work somewhere, and this was before COVID, and lots of the employees were asking, could we work from home a couple of days? Like, I don't have any client meetings. I'm literally sitting at my computer. Is that something we could do? And I remember the managing director, like, kind of scoffed at the idea and completely said no. And he said, well, people are social animals. Like, we love to be around other people all day. And what he meant was, I love to be around other people all day. Now, I didn't know him well enough at the time and I was too junior, but I was thinking, I hate being around people all day. I want to be at home with my cat in the quiet. That's where I do my good work. So I love that we have more options now. But there is something about that leadership piece that I know someone in the comments said they were building a culture function. Please be very careful if you work in internal comms. Don't take responsibility for organizational culture because it doesn't sit with you. It sits with the leadership team. There's really good, compelling research to show that in organizations, hierarchical organizations, people look to senior leaders and those in the C-suite and the CEO. They actively scrutinize them to see what behaviors and what actions are acceptable in this organization. So you might do a great comms session about the new policy of like, meetings don't start late here anymore. If you're late, you're not coming in. And then the next time you have a meeting, your CEO arrives 10 minutes late and you start the meeting all over again. So like the communication you've done is totally meaningless because people will watch what the leaders do and they will take signals from that. So if your leaders are always working late, they're boasting about how they worked on the weekends, they're talking about how they are on emails at midnight, you can't fix that culture with communication because it's based on leadership actions. If they don't role model it, you're really in a bad place. So please don't feel like you have to fix that through comms because you can't.
Do you have any advice we've got Emily's dropped in there going, what can you do when your leaders believe it lies with the people? So if the leaders think it's not my problem, it's everyone else's problem, is there any, Joanna, do you have any advice in that situation?
I mean, I would certainly present a compelling case with some data and with some stories to show good practices and academic research around the role of a leader. And you have leaders and you have followers. People will only follow a leader if they trust them, if they believe them, if they feel that they are credible and trustworthy. If you don't have people following your leaders, you're going to have an organization all over the place doing different things. So the role of a leader is to role model what's allowed and what's tolerated and what's acceptable. And your core values should set the tone for that. If you have a core value around transparency, but then you have a leader that refuses to take any questions from employees or won't do a town hall, they're not role modeling the behavior that's associated with that core value. So I'd have a go of like persuading them otherwise, but if they were really set in that, I would just accept that and go, okay, it's your organization. I'm going to work here. I won't be able to fix that problem. And eventually I'll probably go and work somewhere else.
Do you have anything to add to that, Ryan?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm always going to lean into like data and storytelling coming from an employee research background, but I think changing the way in which we use that type of research, definitely getting better at connecting the cultural indicators with the business performance indicators. I've seen it numerous times where you'll have a chief finance officer. I don't mean to pick on the finance guys, I promise, but you have a chief financial officer and he or she'll be sat there kind of not as engaged as the HR director or the CPO when you're presenting back insights around culture. But as soon as the bit comes up where you show them how it's costing them money or how if you do this specific thing, it'll help you save money, you see them sit up a little bit taller in their chair and suddenly they start asking questions, but they hadn't asked questions for the first 10, 15 minutes of it. So, there is definitely about how you kind of connect some of the senior leaders with the cultural piece, because the reality is engagement surveys, which we've used for years, what do they actually mean to leaders? Like, even to us, everyone on this call, how often outside of the workplace setting have you talked to anyone that you love or care about, friend or family member, about how engaged or disengaged they are at work? It's not a language we use. So as soon as you start talking to leaders and managers about engagement within their teams and their business, what happens? They naturally shut off from it. And I've been doing a lot with organizations to start taking a far more behavioral focus in the research that we're doing, so that actually where we can see that they've got an issue in their business, whether that's a customer experience issue, whether it's a safety performance issue, whether it's a financial issue, actually using more behavioral focused research to show them that, do you see how when you compare this team that you would consider performing against target and this one that isn't, this team is talking in a fundamentally different way about the behaviors that they see and experience on a day-to-day basis, whether that be from their manager, from a leader. You can target it in different ways, but immediately you see the connection being completely different, because it helps them really connect and understand with just what it is about their role that is having an impact on people, and just what the potential impact and improvement is of changing that, of role modeling a certain behavior more, role modeling a different, less desirable behavior less. And so we're seeing this kind of employee research space evolve a little bit and be less about scores and engagement and benchmarking, and more about what do you fundamentally want your people to experience working for your business, and how can we tell you and show you whether that's actually a lived experience or whether it's just words on your website and words on a wall. So for anyone who's wondering how to kind of shift leadership mindset, it doesn't happen overnight. They've obviously got their ways of thinking, but there are some ways in which I've started to see some leadership teams just take the culture piece a lot more seriously than they have done in the past.
I think there's a great line we can borrow as well from Bill Quirk wrote an internal comms book many years ago. I think it's called Making the Connections or something like that. But one of the ways I really like in his book that he defines what internal communication does in a business, he talks about internal communication turns strategy into action. So if you think about your senior leaders, your C-suite leaders as your target audience, you want to convince them to do X, Y, or Z, or to believe something, or to give you buy-in for something. You need to first think about, what do they really care about? They care about delivering the strategy. There are probably 3, 4, 5 things, high-level things. Maybe it's the company needs to make more money, or they need to keep more customers, or they want to reduce customer dissatisfaction scores, or get more market share. Whatever that is, they're on the hook for that. They have to report on their performance around that to the board. So that's what they really care about. So if you can talk to them in a way that says, well, actually, what I'm going to help you do with my role is I'm going to help you to take that strategy that you're accountable for and that you really want to deliver, and I'm going to help make sense of that throughout the organization, so people know what they have to do to make that strategy actually a reality. And if you can speak a little bit more in their terms, or say the top of mind for them is efficiency, we need to be more efficient this year, then you can reverse engineer and go, well, how can improved communication make things more efficient? Like, the simple thing that comes to mind anytime is, if you have a buggy old SharePoint site where nobody can find anything and the search doesn't work, what's that costing your business every year? And like, how much time people are wasting. So Ryan is totally right. Speak about what leaders care about. If you quantify things in terms of money or risks to the business, that will get their attention.
Yeah, it's a really key point, isn't it? It's speaking the people's language that you're trying to communicate with as well, to make sure that the message is getting home, to get that buy-in from those people at perhaps at that senior level. Now, I'm going to ask this one to you, Ryan, just in terms of, how do you feel that organizations can respect employee boundaries whilst still maintaining effective communication?
I think a lot of it, the foundation to get to that place where you've got really great boundaries, really great clarity between people is really good quality communication. Now, Joanna is going to be far more well versed in what a great communicator looks like than I am. But what I often find with, again, just from research time and time again with organizations, we're actually quite poor at communicating. And actually, over the last 10 years, as we've seen more digital kind of channels being introduced that enable us to communicate far easier, whether it's Teams, whether it's a Slack or Yammer or whatever these other ones are, good quality communication is, again, another behavior. Like how well do we communicate? How well do we, how do we communicate with honesty and transparency, with compassion, with empathy and all of that? But also from our individual side, in terms of the boundaries, how good are we at communicating to our managers instead of keeping it inside our head of what our boundaries actually are? Like, how good are we at sitting down with our, as a manager with our teams, or as individuals with our manager, and actually laying out, well, these are all the things that I'm really clear on that is expected of me. Tell me if there's anything else I don't have here. This is how I'm planning on delivering this work. And what I'm hoping that you're going to give me as a manager is support, encouragement, empowerment, and trust to actually deliver against that. And if I don't, I anticipate you're going to have a conversation with me about it. But sometimes I think you have a lot of individuals who will be flustered or frustrated that someone's communicating with them, or they're maybe feeling like there's a pressure on them outside of work. But are they actually having that conversation with their manager and actually setting those boundaries, doing that psychological contracting with them? And actually, Joanna, I would ask, do you think some, like the average colleague in an organization, would feel confident to have that conversation with their manager? Or would they almost be waiting for the manager to have it with them and kind of tease it out of them?
It's so interesting because this comes up quite a lot in conversations that I have. I was speaking to a woman in the States recently who was just, I would say, on the verge of burnout, like really struggling with a very high workload, and talked me through everything she's trying to do and how she's trying to juggle having a family and do all this. And she's working on the weekend, she's knackered. And I asked what I thought was a really straightforward question. I said, talk me through, what does the conversation sound like when you discuss this with your boss? How does that go? And she looked horrified. She said, I've never talked to my boss about this ever. And I said, so they have no idea that you're feeling this way or that your workload is out of control? And she said, oh, my boss doesn't even know what I'm working on half the time. So we talked about this, and she was so afraid of looking like she couldn't handle the job, looking like she was going to be a failure. She didn't want to bring it up. And I said, you're looking at this in the wrong way. Think about it from your boss's perspective. If you win, they look brilliant. Like, they are accountable for you. They are here to support you. If you are doing a great job, that makes them look like they're doing a great job. If you're struggling, that makes them look really bad. So their job is to help you win. So we talked through, how are you going to go in and have a curious conversation to talk about what's happening and to reframe it. And that's exactly what she did. And it was a game changer. But she had to change her mind from thinking this is going to be a confrontation or a conflict and I'm going to look really bad, to actually, let's have a collaborative conversation where we can add value to the business, because this is not it right now. And it was such a game changer. I think people don't do that contracting enough, to talk about what's the priority, what do you expect me to deliver, this is how I'm going to do it, are we on the same page? Okay, let's go.
Yeah, 100%. I think probably everyone could take that as a key piece of advice, to make sure that they're having those open and honest conversations with their leaders. If you are feeling in a situation where you're thinking, I've got too much on my plate here and something is going to have to give, and it's having that conversation to make it clear that, and organizing your priorities and ensuring that the business is comfortable with the things that are going to be your priority, therefore then moving forward. I mean, from an IC perspective, how do you strike that right balance between keeping employees informed and then avoiding that communication fatigue or kind of like boundary crossing? Because I mean, if we think about the right to disconnect, it's that, if you're sending out an important comms message, does it need to go at 9 o'clock at night? Does it, when becomes like that balance between sending the message out regardless of time, or and having so many messages going out that people almost have so many notices, it's like I don't know which one to read first. I'll come to you, Joanna, for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, any good internal communication system needs to be built at that sweet spot, that intersection of what the business needs and what employees want. So there's that bit in the middle where you've got the right channels, the right messages, the right context, the right level. And that's why our job is so difficult, right? Because that's different in every single organization. Like, I can't give you a magic formula. I would if I could. I think it's a bit more nuanced these days. Like when I think back to, before COVID, and I might have worked in an office in Dublin and we were all on the same time schedule, all in the same time zone, all in the same physical place. And I knew, for example, that everyone would go for a coffee break at 10:15, the whole floor would empty out, and I would have the newsletter in their inbox when they came back, because I knew they didn't want to get stuck straight into work. So it was easy to kind of plan when I should capture their attention. It's more difficult now, I think, but the trick is the same as it always was, which is to get to know your audience and your different audiences really well. So what is the best way to reach them? How do they want to receive information? Like what would work for them rather than what works for us? Where are the opportunities to meet them where they are that we're probably not exploiting yet? And also there's like great, for me, like one of my words of the year is simplicity. Like sometimes we're so obsessed with adding more things. We need a new tool, we need a new app, we need a new way of doing this. Well, actually, maybe you don't. Maybe you need to simplify and subtract and take some things away. Maybe we've made things too complicated. Maybe, as you said earlier, like employees have so many different places to go for things. Maybe we want to look at the whole thing and just make it easier and simpler and quicker, because we forget sometimes employees aren't at work to hear our beautiful communications. They're there to do a job. And that's what we're supposed to enable them to do.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Ryan, at all in terms of?
I agree with Joanna. Let's ask people as well. What of all of our communication channels that we're using, which ones do you find impactful? Which do you find most useful? What are the how would you like to be communicated with? Let's ask people so we can get that balance right between using like the organizational need versus the individual need. So again, using our actual employee feedback to help us shape how we communicate is a no-brainer. But the only bit I would add on top of what Joanna said is let's think about ease versus impact. And again, as leaders and managers, we need to think about ease versus impact, because there's so much research out there that shows, as you would expect, this won't be a surprise, the majority of leaders and managers rely more on email than they do face-to-face comms. But which one has a much higher impact on confidence in and trust in line manager and confidence and trust in leader? It's face-to-face comms. So naturally, what happens is, as we start layering in everything we talked about earlier on around the increased demands that we have, and trying to do more with less as organizations, taking time away from people, but also introducing more and more digital channels, everything is going to kind of pull you towards just doing something by email or pushing some information out in a newsletter, for example. And what we need to do is remind ourselves of just how important it is to have proper, good quality face-to-face conversations with people and within teams. And personal view, I don't see that happening enough inside organizations. And I think it's a big cause and contributing factor to where we're at with declining levels of engagement and motivation and well-being.
100%. Well, I'm just conscious of time, so I am going to move us forward now to just opening up a Q&A. We've answered a few of the questions and brought in some of your thoughts and comments into the chat there as we have been moving through. And there is a question that I just wanted to put to Ryan and Joanna, and this is coming in, can't see who it's from Dana. And she's just said, she's asking about they've got verbal commitment and support from their executive leadership team, but they're not walking the talk. Do you have any hints and tips on how to get them to demonstrate that they're actually supporting the efforts? Ryan, I'll come to you. You've got
a bit of what we touched on about, show them through good quality data and stories, just what impact that they're having on how people are feeling. But that's going to be the main thing. You need to show them the impact and the influence that they're having on the perception of culture and the lived experience of colleagues. And through some of the behavioral stuff that I mentioned, it can be easier for us to show leaders and managers specifically what it is that they need to do and need to role model more of, for you to embed the culture that you want to see and have that positive impact on colleagues. And just a quick one to add to that is reframing of conversations. Now, too often we get employee survey results and we go into leadership teams and we say, look at these scores, and we'll have a conversation around what some of the low scoring areas are and what can we do to improve it. And quite often, as I mentioned, we're seeing scores around executive leadership being some of the lower scoring areas. And so sometimes just thinking about the leader's natural reaction to that, we often see it as a bit of defensiveness, or a bit of, they want to kind of shy away from it. So sometimes just reframing the question to them, what would need to be true in our organization for our colleagues to feel more positively about leadership, or what would need to be true in our organization or of our culture for less colleagues to feel under emotional, physical strain from a well-being perspective. And sometimes when you frame the question that way, it leads to a much better quality of conversation and thought and contribution from leadership teams, because it feels less like they're under attack from the data in some way.
Yeah, I think I do agree. I think there's a role here, and totally depends on your confidence in your seniority and relationship with the leadership team. But there's a role for internal communicators to speak truth to power, because leadership teams are often completely disconnected from the employee experience. They don't understand, or maybe they fundamentally misunderstand what it's like to work there and what their behavior looks like and how their actions are being perceived. So there's a role for us to be the insights gatherer and go and have those conversations and go, well, actually, this is how people are feeling and this is what people are telling me. And don't be afraid to use qualitative data, like verbatim quotes from people, or this is how people feel. I think there can be sometimes a feeling that's not real data. It absolutely is. So to be that person who speaks the truth to power and say, well, actually, your actions are having a big impact, and this is how you're showing up, and this is what people are saying about you, and this is the impact on the business. This is also, by the way, why a lot of people hire consultants, because it's so much safer to get somebody outside to come in and tell your leadership all this, rather than you being the messenger that might get shot. But I think there's a role there for us not to overextend. I don't want you to think, oh, my leaders aren't walking the walk, how do I solve that? You don't. That's not your job. They're paid way more than you. Don't try to fix them, but you can bring them the insights. You can show them what's happening. You can make recommendations for change. You can lead the horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. Is that the phrase? So just again, be wary of that scope creep and don't take it on your own shoulders to fix everything, because you can't.
Really sound advice. Thank you, Joanna. And we've got a question here from Emily as well, about asking if we have any best-in-class examples that we can share where organisations have effectively implemented the right to disconnect. Now, Joanna, I know this has been legislated in Ireland and being based on that side of the water. I didn't know if you had any insight that you could share at all on that question.
So it is a thing here in Ireland, and the government were quite bullish on it when they introduced it. But when the legislation came through, it was a bit softer, a little bit weaker than perhaps everybody expected. So employers can be encouraged very strongly to allow employees to disconnect, whether it's really happening in reality and whether this is actually being used to change behaviors. I don't know. In terms of answering the direct question, I don't know. I think some companies just naturally do this very well. Like there are some companies that, it's normal to finish. Like I won't say that. There's a friend of mine that just started a company a couple of months ago and was sort of explaining, oh, I have a medical appointment coming up, and do I need to book time off for that? And like one day I have to finish slightly early to bring my dog to the vet or whatever. And like her boss was like, why are you even telling me this? Like you just do your work when it suits you and then we'll discuss it. Like if you need to go to the vet or you need to go to the doctor, you just do that. And then they were saying, oh, but I won't be able to work late. I have this thing. And she was horrified at the idea of working late. So in this company, they just seem to have a really good way of working where employees are trusted, where overtime is not even considered. there doesn't need to be a right to disconnect because their behavior is so good and their culture is so good. So I feel like maybe this right to disconnect is in there for all the companies that just need that little like tap on the shoulder to say, actually, it's not right. But I don't have any particular examples of like companies that have implemented this and are changing because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Joanna, I think a big reason for that is you know, you can't introduce a policy like this and it change the culture. Like, you know, organizations have sexual harassment policies, you know, bullying and harassment policies, but it still happens inside organizations, as we know from an HR perspective. There continues to be the odd cases, and then you see things coming out in the news, you know, famous cases of it happening. You know, we have health and safety policies, and then, you know, sometimes they're not adhered to, and it's not always behavior that is kind of caught out and needs to change at the time. It has to come like behavioral, it has to be cultural. And so the organizations that are best preventing burnout and best managing the well-being and engagement of their colleagues are the ones that are really focusing on culture and getting really strong leadership, management, communication in place. And then that leads to what you've just said, Joanna, the kind of company where you can't even quite put your finger on why it's happening, because it just is. That's a culture thing. It's not a policy. They probably don't even have a policy in that organization. It just happens through trust, which comes from the culture. So if we work on culture, we'll get to this end game and outcome that we want to see of reduced burnout as a direct result.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. I think even if you've got, like you say there, just because you've got a policy doesn't mean that that's going to solve the problem. It's a wider piece. And I think it's everybody within the organization has their part to play in terms of that cultural shift to ensuring that actually people, you know, you don't really need this policy on the right to disconnect, because everyone feels as though, you know, they've got that freedom to work when it's right for them, and they're not expected to jump just because somebody sent a message at 8 o'clock at night because they happen to be doing some work. Then they're expected to reply at that time.
Yeah.
So we're just going to have a little recap of some of the key points of things that we've kind of covered in today's session before we wrap up. I'm very conscious of the time here, but I think just some key takeaways from today's session is, I think it's super important that you get clear scope on your role and what you're actually expected to deliver. Get curious about where the burnout is coming from. Is it the organization or is it you? Are you putting too much pressure on yourself to get things done? And also take your work emails off your personal phone. Do it now. If you do nothing else in the last 2 minutes, do that. The other thing to talk about as well, and we've just mentioned about this, is culture is really key to tackling that burnout problem. Just because you've got that policy doesn't mean it's going to fix the issue. And also using data to get better understanding of where the burnout risk is across the business. Do you have pockets of, you know, teams within the organization that are really under-resourced and struggling, and perhaps they need a bit more attention? So using that data is really, really key. And I'd also just like to say thank you and take this opportunity to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Now, do keep an eye on the toolkit landing in your inbox in the next week or so. It will include a recording of today's webinar. There will also be our burnout report. So if there's any questions that we perhaps haven't managed to answer as we've been going through today's session, hopefully you'll be able to find the answers in that report. And you will also have access to the full survey results as well. We'll also be uploading the recording onto our website, which you'll be able to access for the next month. Plus, you'll find a whole load of other guides and resources on there as well. So you can check that out at oak.com. And finally, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to both Joanna and Ryan for joining us today and sharing what I'm sure you will all agree with some really insightful thoughts on how we can better approach the right to disconnect. It's such an important topic, and your perspectives gave us a lot to think about. So thank you again to everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.